2 days ago, Canadians everywhere stood a little taller, threw their heads back a little more, thrust out their chests as their hearts swelled with well-placed pride in their country. But even as they celebrated Canada, even as they heard the beloved tones of our country's national anthem, I am sure that many Canadians felt at least a little twinge of frustration in their patriotic hearts. Why? Well, if you have been paying attention to the national conversation, you will know. Because you see, lately, when talking about the national anthem, there has been talk of that thing that fills the heart of every Presbyterian with fear and dread. There has been talk of change. And I'm not going to get in the middle of that discussion today. I'm smarter than that. I'm not going to give any opinions today over whether or not the lyrics of O Canada should be changed or updated. But I raise the issue with some trepidation, merely because it leads me to another, I think, much more important question. Because you see, in this discussion about whether or not we make changes in our national anthem, it has focused our attention on one particular line in that anthem. And that line we have all learned growing up as this: true patriot love in all thy sons command. And my question is this: whether or not we all want to see ourselves as sons, that's a different issue. My question is this: what exactly does true patriot love look like in Canada in 2016? What does it look like now to stand on guard for our country? Now, when those words were first put into the national anthem, and by the way, they are not the original English translation, those words were first changed back in 1914. And when those words were first changed, I think people had a very clear idea of what true patriot love looked like. Because it seems doubtless that that change was made at that time as a way to encourage the young sons of Canada to go and enlist and stand on guard for their country on the battlefields of Europe during the Great War. And I know that all of us have nothing but the highest respect for all of those men and women, past and present, who have done their patriotic duty and have served their country in the military. We have nothing but admiration for them. But at the same time, I think we all understand that true patriot love also extends to other things. And in the shadow of Canada Day 2016, I think it's a worthwhile question to ask. What does it mean? What other things does it mean to stand on guard for our country? There is a commandment in the book of Deuteronomy that I think might help us to begin to answer that question today. Now, it's easy to miss the importance of this commandment because, first of all, it comes in the midst of all kinds of really not very acceptable stuff. I mean, the passage we read this morning begins with a rather terrible description of the you this morning. I included it not because I think we need to follow all of that today. I think we need to avoid a lot of it. But it does set the context. That was the situation in that world. And in that world, it was often taken for granted that if you were to stand on guard for your country, if you were to get true patriot love for your country, that it included, at least sometimes, that kind of thing. War and death and mayhem and destruction. But I don't want to necessarily focus on that part. Because as you continue to read through that passage, you come to a very specific commandment that I find very interesting. And it is a commandment that describes exactly how you are to proceed in a situation where you are besieging a city. To besiege a city was not an uncommon thing in the ancient world. When you had an enemy, and that enemy shut themselves up inside, behind the walls of their city, you had to conduct a siege. And you had to stay there and use whatever means you could to get them out of there. And in conducting a siege, one of the things you needed a great deal of in the ancient world was wood. And so you would go through the surrounding countryside and you would chop down trees to get wood to feed your campfires, to build stockades, to build ladders and towers and other devices to get into that city. So that's the situation. You're in a siege, you need wood to get into the city. But then we come across this commandment. The commandment reads like this. If you besiege a town for a long time, you must not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. Although you may take food from them, you must not cut them down. You may destroy only the trees that you know do not produce fruit. So that's a commandment. It's in the Bible. So what do we do with this commandment? At first glance, it would seem that it doesn't really have anything to do with modern life. Because first of all, in modern warfare, besieging a city almost never happens. So the situation doesn't arise. What's more, modern armies do not use wood. They don't use wood for their weapons, for their armaments, or their defenses. So this situation doesn't arise. So I guess we don't need this commandment. We can safely ignore it. It doesn't have any modern application. Or does it? I wonder. I mean, I would say that, sure, if it was just an arbitrary commandment that maybe God made up on the spot that really didn't have much logic behind it, but I don't believe that God makes arbitrary commandments. There's a reason behind this commandment. And I think if we're going to appreciate this commandment and see how it might apply today, we need to understand that reason. So, like I say, if you're conducting a siege, one of the things you would need is wood. One of the things you might get that wood from was fruit trees. The special thing about fruit trees is, of course, that they produce fruit. In that part of the world, fruit trees would include things like olive trees and fig trees and date palms and pomegranate trees and lots of other fruit-producing trees. And they're great sources for food. But they also can be sources for wood. the things you really need is lots of wood. So you can imagine, when you're in a military situation like that, often you are desperate for victory. And so you're going to use whatever you can get your hands on to get that victory, right? So the temptation very clearly would be to cut down whatever trees you find, fruit-bearing or otherwise, to get that victory. That's what you need right now. The Bible says no. The Bible says no, you cannot cut down the fruit trees. Why not? Well, to understand why not, you need to understand one simple fact that maybe would have been obvious to ancient Israelites, but that's not obvious to us. And that fact is this: fruit trees require a long-term investment. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to plant an olive tree. In the Mediterranean world, olive trees are extremely important. Olive oil is just about the only consistent source of fat in the Mediterranean diet. And human beings cannot live without fat. So olive trees are essential. So you take your olive tree, you plant it in the ground, you let it go for 1 year. How many olives do you get from that tree in the first year? 0. None. No olives. Second year, no olives. Third year, fourth year, no olives from your tree. In the 5th year, if you're lucky, you might get a few olives. You might. In the 6th year, you will almost certainly get a small crop of olives from your tree. And every year after that, you will get a larger and larger crop until your tree is about 50 years old. When your tree is 50 years old, it will produce a huge, abundant crop of olives. At which point it will begin to die. So if you want to get olives, there's no way to get them quickly. It's a long-term commitment, and you need to invest in those trees a long time and let them grow undisturbed for a very long time. So what is this commandment about? It's about meeting that immediate need. You need wood to win this battle, this week, this month. It's about sacrificing long-term health and prosperity and life for the sake of what I need right now. Because if you cut down an olive grove to take a city, it's going to take 5 decades, half a century, to replace the production you have lost to win one victory today. So that's what this commandment is about. It's about not sacrificing long-term productivity and prosperity for the sake of today's need. Can I tell you something? This is a bit of a confession. When it comes to the commandments of the Bible, I know that modern translations of the Bible are better, they're more accurate in many ways. But somehow the commandments, they just don't seem real, they don't seem divine. Unless you get them in that good old King James Version of the Bible. So for this commandment, for the other commandments I'm looking at in this series, I'm going to go back to the King James Version. In my heart, this commandment will always be, thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof, by forcing an axe against them. Thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof, by forcing an axe against them. What does that commandment mean today? once we understand that it's about not sacrificing long-term life and prosperity for the sake of a short-term gain. What does it mean, for example, if you are in the business world? I mean, if you're running a company, if you're running a corporation, you have a very difficult job, of course. And one of the things that makes running a business today is an obsession with profits. Short-term profits. You need to make money, you need to make a lot of money, and you need to make it this quarter in order to keep your stockholders happy. And that is the continual pressure in the business world today. And when that becomes the thing you obsess over, when you obsess over this quarter's profits, just like a general conducting a siege would obsess over getting enough wood to win, what do? The continual temptation is to sacrifice the long-term health and prosperity of that company for the sake of this quarter's profits, right? So what do we see companies doing? Well, there's this division over here. Research and development. Costs a lot of money. Doesn't produce any profits, not now. I mean, yeah, maybe in a few years they'll come up with a product and then we'll have to put it into development. It's going to take forever. It's costing a lot of money right now and we're not getting anything out of it for this quarter. Let's just cut research and development. It's going to look good for this quarter. And while we're at it, why don't we just lay off all of those experienced employees? Because they know what they're doing, but they're really expensive. Can't we just replace them all with temporary workers? I mean, sure, the temporary workers, they won't care about the long-term health of the company, but boy, will it really help the bottom line this quarter. Just think of the stock. And I know those are kind of extreme examples, but it is kind of thinking that you see in the business world when all that matters is this quarter's profits. Forget the long-term health. Forget the long-term prosperity. This quarter's what matters. Lots of companies get in trouble because they are sacrificing their long-term health. And if it was just the business world where that kind of thing happened, that would be bad enough. Because, of course, all of these companies and corporations, they affect lots of people. They affect their employees. They affect the communities where they are located, or at least where they're located for now, until they find someplace else where they can move and pay their workers less. So it's bad enough when this happens in the business world, but we see the same kind of thinking affecting all other kinds of parts of life. I celebrated my country 2 days ago. I was grateful, I prayed for my country, I was thankful for my country, and yet I cannot help at times to worry about my country. Because this thinking also affects our country. We're willing to destroy the trees thereof. We are willing to sacrifice the long-term health and prosperity in search of a short-term fix. A few years ago, as we know, oil prices, they were riding high. All kinds of profits were being made, and so the government looked around and said, you know, with the price of oil this high, there's all kinds of money to be made from the tar sands, all kinds of wonderful high-paying jobs to be created, all kinds of revenue for the government profits. So I made this decision. Let's throw all of these resources into the tar sands. Let's use up all of these resources to get as much oil as we can out of those tar sands. And if there were long-term consequences, pollution of groundwater, destruction of surface water, environmental destruction, greenhouse gas And so it seemed worthwhile to sacrifice those, to not worry about those long-term theoretical problems because the opportunity for short-term gain was right there in front of us. Of course, when the price of oil took a nosedive, those calculations looked quite a bit different. And I know that's just one example, and I'm not even trying to point out some particular government's policies, because every government does this kind of thing. Indeed, our political system is set up for this kind of thing. The system is set up to focus on this election cycle. The government is under continual pressure to make sure that we build that prosperity and economy for this election cycle. And it becomes very rare to find that politician who's willing to lift up his head or her head and look beyond the present need and the present election cycle, and to give a vision for where we need to go as a country. As Canadians, we promise. Every time we sing the anthem, we promise to stand on guard for our country. And nobody's talking about changing those lyrics. Standing on guard for our country has to be about more than just the needs of right now and this election cycle and the next few months. And as Canadians, I think that means one of the things we need to do is keep our eyes open for those rare political and other leaders who are willing to lift up their eyes and look down the road and think about policies that lead us to the country we need to be. Long-term prosperity and freedom and strength for all. To do otherwise is to destroy the trees thereof. Sacrifice our long-term health, prosperity, and wealth for the sake of a quick fix. Of course, we do it in other areas of life as well. Did we do it in the church? I mean, in the life of the church, there is this continual temptation, well, let's focus on where we are right now, and on this quarter, and on this budget, and the needs for right now. And God does not call us to conduct the church like that. God promises that if we keep our mission, our long-term mission in mind, that's where we'll go. If we have a vision, a long-term vision, God will take us where we need to go, but without a vision, the people will perish. In the church, we have to be careful not to destroy the trees thereof. In our personal lives, you need to be careful not to destroy the trees thereof. God wants you to look up from where you are right now and your needs right now, and to see down the road and to where God is calling you to be and who God is calling you to be. To do otherwise is to destroy the trees thereof. This commandment. First glance seems to have nothing to do with modern life. Seems to be all about a situation that doesn't exist anymore, that doesn't come up. But I think if we look closer at it, we realize that there's a deep concern for long-term health and prosperity, and not being willing to sacrifice that for the sake of the needs of right now. That concern comes from God through this commandment. And it's a concern for us and who we need to be. God does not want us to destroy the trees thereof. That, for me, today, is what it means to stand on guard for my country. Will you take a few moments in silence?